This is an Iron Age hill fort, southern Britain, 2,500 years old, and it's a significant problem. Come and take a look at this. It has all the hallmarks of an Iron Age hill fort. We have pottery finds and Iron Age associated bits and pieces to confirm its age from archaeological digs. We have huge bank here, the ditch, the counterscarp, but we have no formal evidence of people actually living here. And even if we do find evidence one day, we have no immediate access to rivers, streams or fresh water. Add to that, well, the ramparts here, the bank, the ditch, the counterscarp, none of this here on this entire site has any evidence of conflict whatsoever. And if that wasn't enough for you, consider this. If we look in that direction to the northwest, well, we have another cluster, 2, 3, 4, maybe more hill forts within just a few miles. It gets worse. Zoom out again and we have scores here, all within touching distance of one another. Danebury, Crawley, Bury, Bulksbury, Andyke, Tidbury, Sidbury. I could go on, but the point is often made that we see so many hill forts in Britain that don't really align with the population estimates of the time from the Iron Age. And add to that as well, why aren't we seeing an even distribution of these? We see clusters. We don't see what you would expect from perhaps a more tribal-based Iron Age people. Hill fort questions are fascinating, and there seem to be many myths and falsehoods out there of people claiming that archaeologists have somehow misunderstood their use or, as ever, are hiding something from you. So, let's tackle them. Here are our top 5 hill fort myths. (1807) and Reverend Richard Earmonger of Wherwell Vicarage in northwest Hampshire wrote to William Cunnington, essentially requesting for assistance with some archaeology. Here, I say here, just across the valley there, old Winchester Hill, a hill fort in the distance. Now by this point in time, Sir William Cunnington was an astute antiquarian of his time, and much of his work was funded by Sir Richard Colt Hoare. We see in a letter from the good Reverend to William Cunnington that he hopes Sir Richard Colt Hoare can join the party along with the Wiltshire labourers. So essentially that's him asking for help from John and Stephen Parker. They're not the labourers of this setup, but they're also good archaeologists. The Reverend wants to investigate this site, Old Winchester Hill. Specifically though, the Reverend was more interested in these. These are the Bronze Age barrows that sit right in the middle of this hill fort, a whole era before the earthworks were built that circle this place. And for the Reverend though, his story was about to end very quickly, because within about 2 days of the dig starting on these Bronze Age barrows, he was about to receive some very bad news. The Parker brothers established that the tumuli have previously been robbed out and not afforded a single novelty. The letters held in devises, the Wiltshire Museum, between all of these parties and the comings and the goings, they're absolutely fascinating. We learn insights like the Parker brothers went on foot between Heytesbury and Wiltshire to here, Old Winchester Hill. It tells you that they may have been ripped off by the tolls along the way. It's a really fascinating time for this early archaeology, and some real insights held in the museum. But for us, today, we want to understand what they established about the hill fort. Nothing. William Cunnington wrote back to him and suggested there was no evidence of settlement here, perhaps some early Celtic field systems nearby, but that was it. So if the conclusion was, well, no one lived here, spent any time in here of any significant length, then what exactly are we doing building this huge bank and ditch down below? When you climb up here, it's easy to appreciate that it's kind of hard to believe anyone would indeed live here. That was pretty much it for full-on digs here. We just put this down to a big question mark. Now, a lot of archaeology happens without the use of a trowel and a shovel digging a hole in the ground. And sometimes using certain techniques, well, the landscape can reveal itself in a whole new, different way than the antiquarians of old would have seen before. Some significant LiDAR work, field observations and surveys uncovered something here. 70 slight depressions within this fort. These were recorded as the remains of roundhouse platforms. Evidence of real structures, real lives here on the hill. Well, that certainly doesn't mean that we have a bustling town here for the entire Iron Age, maybe 700-800 years or so. It just means that perhaps even for a snippet of time we have occupation here and people lived here. And more importantly than that, well, it doesn't account for hundreds of other Hillforts around the country. Specifically, let me show you something else. So I picked another Hillfort that I've been wanting to see for some time, Hammer Wood. Okay, we've entered West Sussex, and a big shout out to the Shithurst Buddhist community. Hope I pronounced that correctly, because they allow you into these woodlands, which are private, if you're very quiet and respectful of the quiet areas. So forgive me if I'm whispering. Hammer Wood isn't the sort of Hillfort you find on postcards or heritage maps. It's hidden beneath the trees there, almost invisible. In fact, it wasn't formally discovered until 1956. Now, since then, just one excavation in 1957. Now, that excavation did find something strange. No evidence of houses as such or any kind of settlement plan, but they did find evidence of hearths and scorched earth. They found evidence of pottery and fragments of pottery. Okay, so here are the first sets of earthwork on this north side. You can see the ditch here and a bank there on the inside. Not sure how well that'll come out. Let's head into the actual Hillfort, because there is one other thing, a really important thing that will help us piece this whole puzzle together. You see, when I do the favourite thing that I enjoy doing, flipping to the maps, we reveal something else key here, the route. We have a ridgeway east-west, and we have a Roman road north-south. Add to that we have the valley in front of us too, with the river Rover, and of course control of trade on all of these routes. Okay, so I'm almost in the middle of this Hillfort, and here's a really important thing. So we aren't seeing a permanent home here. There is no evidence of that at all, but we are seeing fires, we're seeing pottery production, and for me this is the key. Let's turn you around so you can see exactly what I can see. Now, if we remove those trees there in the foreground, that is the southern bank of this Hillfort. It's fortified there, and there are some earthworks in front of it. Remove those trees and what can we see? We can see the valley below, we can see a really important river, and we can see the ridge across on our way. So perhaps we're seeing a few different uses over this significant period of time for this Hillfort. I would love to say this is to do with monitoring of trade in and out of this valley and the landscape obviously just below us. It doesn't just have to be about the living and the village and the fortification. This is what the Iron Age people did. For as long as Hillforts have been studied, one question has lingered on: how do people live here without water? Okay, so this is the base of Torbury Hillfort, way up there above me, and my ability to get there and see this scheduled monument is somewhat hindered at the moment, as that sign just there implies as well. So we'll see how we get on. Now, Torbury, like many, as I say, it stands right up in the landscape, and so the question is, like many, we don't see a stream, a river, a steady access to water. So that myth arose. How would a settlement there have immediate access to a constant supply of water? If there was any kind of fortification there, well, a siege there would last 5 minutes. This is indeed Torbury Hillfort. The ramparts and earthworks of this site were built between 600 to 400 BCE. Between 100 and 200 years later, we have the new walled passageway in, and then around 100 BC the gate was destroyed and the site was completely abandoned. That all sounds nice and succinct, but that's like now against Henry VIII sort of time, 500 years of this place being occupied by the Iron Age people. Now, we don't have evidence of huts or dwellings here, but again we have evidence of continued use of pottery, a lot of pottery, the remodelling of the walls, and yet no water. Okay, so no water within the site, but if we have a look at the landscape around us and have a look at the map, we have the letter W. W doesn't mean well, it actually means spring. So we do have a water source here for this monumental Hillfort, which I really can't get to, and I'm a little bit disappointed. It's a scheduled monument, but we have private signs all the way along this pathway, and lots of people doing lots of cutting on site. Real disappointment. I don't want to harp on about scheduled monuments and our inability to lack a lot of them, but this is one where I'd love to just have a look and a walk on the landscape and see the view, but sadly it's completely inaccessible. back over here where we started today's journey, Woolbury Hillfort, and the pattern repeats. 7.5 hectares in size, its ramparts still rising from the Hampshire Downs. Excavations here were relatively small compared to some of the others. I think just 2% of this Woolbury Hillfort was excavated, and but even in that 2% they found 6 pits, I guess grain store pits. They found pottery sherds and all sorts of Iron Age associated bits and pieces, but they didn't find any houses or dwellings or settlement patterns. Not to say that they won't if we had a look again in the future, but what it did have was something far more subtle. Okay, so we're about 30 yards away from the Woolbury ramparts just there, and I was really hoping to show you something that's marked on the map. A pond, a big dew pond, fair size as well, and it was noted in those early studies as somewhere which would have provided a water source. I can't find it for the life of me. Not to say it doesn't exist, but we have extremely thick vegetation. Now, as I continue in this direction, we see something else a little bit more exciting for us on today's journey than a pond, and I think we want to head in that direction about 50 yards or so. This is something else. Right, I've placed the camera right here for a very specific reason. Can you see what I'm looking at? Nothing on the horizon at all, but right here on the landscape in front of me there, you've got kind of a linear boundary. Back when Cunliffe & Co did a lot of their studies here, and I think another archaeological society, they found this using aerial photography, more recently confirmed by LiDAR, and we see on this side, we see a lot of Bronze Age filled systems, and on this side we see a lot of Bronze Age barrows, and this line here, this linear boundary, seems to demarcate the two somehow. Now this would have been prior to the Iron Age Hillfort, of course, but just shows us this landscape was in use for a long time, and what a fascinating landscape it is. This was a landscape already shaped by generations before, long before the first ramparts were thrown up behind us at Woolbury Hillfort. If water was always nearby, springs at the base perhaps, ponds nearby, well maybe these sites in many cases weren't meant for long habitation. Well, some yes, but others maybe not. But we are starting to build a picture now, because Barry Cunliffe suggested that maybe this one here, Woolbury, was just used as a border protection, a trade route policing station, an edge of a tribal territory perhaps. And of course Woolbury itself can help us understand maybe the next myth of Hillforts, that of the population one. So if I zoom out from here and draw a line around 10-mile radius from this very site, Woolbury Hillfort, we have a question to answer, because I estimate we have around 17 Hillforts, 17 in a 10-mile radius. So I'm at Woolbury Hillfort, northwest Hampshire, and in the 60s, 70s and 80s, Barry Cunliffe came here and he did some excavations on a lot of Hillforts over in that direction, Danebury, Cawley, Bury, you name it, and he concluded that at Danebury Hillfort, well, maybe up to 600 people were living there at one particular point. We had houses, streets, grain stores in the ground, farmsteads, all aspects of the human ecosystem you'd need to sustain life. Now if we look at the Hillfort Atlas by the University of Oxford, well, we have over 4,000 Hillforts in the UK to consider. Here they all are, so some simple math, 4,147 times 600, and we have a population of 2.5 million. That's a little bit of a problem, because best estimates from a huge variety of sources put the population between 500,000 at the start of the Iron Age, maybe up to 2 million towards the end. I'm not going to dwell on that for too long, but let's consider Woolbury Hillfort, which is where I am now. You might wonder what I'm doing, but I'm trying to travel across a bit of open access land to its western side, because if I do that, well, I can get to the ramparts that you can't actually get to by the normal footpath up there. Sounds a bit obscure, but you'll see what I mean very shortly. I'm reminded of a bit of a research I did around a year ago on Hillforts, and I considered a lot of the Hillforts in this area because we have so many close together, and Bury in particular stood out for a specific reason. Bury was never occupied that we're aware of. Instead, we find significant amounts of equine related items, a lot of them. That site was producing all kinds of horse bits and pieces and chariot parts. Bury was an industrial estate, perhaps not for its entire length, but whatever, it was not built or even remodelled for occupation at any point. So that was not an easy walk to get to along this southern ridge. This is an open access bit of land, which in the UK means you can walk here, but it's impossible to get to unless you're willing to climb a 5-foot fence with barbed wire on top, or work your way through the thick, dense vegetation that also accompanies it. So I'm now able to see Walbury Hillfort in a very different light. I've never seen this western side before. And of course, being able to see something in a different light is exactly what we can do when we consider Bury, as we did before, and its use as an industrial site, an Iron Age industrial site. Well, all of a sudden we can now see that we have a number of hill forts in a close concentration there, which in my opinion formed part of a close-knit tribe. And this one here, Walbury, whilst it wasn't formally occupied in a lived-in sense, we have evidence that people were here, and we're also on a ridge which overlooks an area where there's not so many hill forts, if any, for quite some miles. So perhaps we're seeing this as a border, which is exactly what Barry Cunliffe suggested way back in the 60s and 70s. So back at Hammerwood, West Sussex, well, I've reached the southern end of the hill fort itself, and they didn't need to build a ditch here on this southern side. The hill is so steep in front of us, they've just cut wall ledge into this landscape. It's a fascinating place, and I can see into the trees well below me. Let's consider that word, hill fort, because when the antiquarians came here in the 18th, 19th century, and they saw all of these places, well, you can understand their need to associate that with warring tribes. They lived in a time of unrest, so this to them was the Iron Age. This was the place of the ancient Britons and how they protected themselves from other tribes and whatever else they were protecting themselves against. That word stuck, fort, fortification, and it's even on our maps today as a remnant of that time. Those early scholars weren't wrong to be impressed. Vast earthworks, banks, deep ditches, commanding views, all the visual language of a defensive structure. But they lived in an age of an empire when every ancient wall was imagined as military. To them, the past was filled with wars of tribes, Romans, Celts, you name it. So naturally, these huge enclosures became the battlegrounds of their imagination. And yet when archaeologists began to get the opportunity to excavate and understand places like this, well, the evidence for war and battle was surprisingly lacking. But yes, we do have evidence in a few places of battle and intertribal battles, but not a great deal has been uncovered. What we do find are earthworks, monumental ramparts of chalk and clay, some faced with timber or stone. And here, Hammerwood, well, we have the entire earthworks lined with ironstone slabs. That's not the first time I've seen sort of a masonry style construction. It's well engineered, it defines a fortification, but we have absolutely no evidence here, and with many others, of any kind of conflict. To me, it feels like this was the way of the Iron Age people. Building with earth was an act of community, of visibility. Ramparts could mark identity in closed gatherings or symbolise power just as much as they could defend against any danger. The scale of these places wasn't just about the practicalness of it. The earthworks weren't just about being practical. It represented social aspect to it. It represented a really strong community. When we see walls like this, well, we immediately think, okay, well, this is the hill fort that we are surrounding now, and we immediately think of conflict and battle. And I think it wasn't just about that, it was about a more complex story. Yes, it represented the readiness of the Iron Age people to protect the resource they had, but I also think it represented a social structure that's a lot more complex than we sort of assume from the outside in that word, fort. Okay, this is a bit of a rare treat for me. Come and have a look at this. This entire area here has recently been cut back, and all of a sudden it's revealed this hill fort. Now, we knew it was here already, but all of a sudden we can see it for the first time in 50 or 60 years. In fact, you actually drive through the middle of this on a main road just there, probably without even realising it was there. No formal excavations have been done here, but we have a seemingly classic hill fort type construction on the edge of a ridge looking north and west. We have an inner bank and a ditch and a much smaller counter scarp. So we probably need to consider this again, the road that cuts right through the middle of this hill fort, because it is actually a Roman road, and we can therefore probably conclude that it was a route long before the Romans arrived through here. So as I stand here, kind of in the middle of Beresbury Hillfort or Hampshire Gate, consider the notion that we've just discussed about this routeway, and consider the distribution myth that says, well, all Hillforts should surely be evenly spaced if we're protecting tribal areas. Instead, we don't see that. We don't see any kind of even distribution. We see Hillforts like this one in places where actually you might expect to see them on a routeway that's really important for trade, perhaps. And of course you see them on coastal areas, you see them on ridgeways, you see them perhaps in clusters where they were doing different things for the same community. Well yes, let's take that a step further. We've already established long ago that Hillforts were not just to act as centres for warring tribes. Hillforts adorn this land and have many functions: marketplaces, trade routes and manufacturing sites, dwellings, protection of inland routes, maybe protection of resources, social places. Hillforts are fascinating places for me. They kind of define the Iron Age as a whole. I'm sure that's the first thing that comes to many people's minds, yours perhaps included. But one thing we need to keep ourselves grounded with is time. The Iron Age was 800 BC to the formal arrival of the Romans, and even if the Hillforts themselves were potentially out of use maybe 100 BCE, well, that's still 700 years of use of these Hillforts, these huge earthwork structures that we see today. These places don't have to sustain life. They only have to host it for a few days, a season, a generation, maybe longer, but whatever was needed. The multitude of uses that we've touched on today assume that we can fit the Iron Age into a nice neat box, but that's like me describing life today the same as it was in 1200 CE. The Hillfort itself defined the Iron Age, not necessarily what was inside the Hillfort, depending on what it was used for. Well, perhaps instead the landscape was their resource, and the Hillfort, well, that was the symbol. I've been Paul. I hope you've enjoyed this week's little video. If you've really enjoyed it and you'd like to support the channel, support what we do here, well, you can click on all the good links in the description below. We have a Patreon and a YouTube members you can sign up to see some behind the scenes good stuff. I'll see you this time next week.